Tang Taizong, the emperor who united military power with cultural wisdom. Welcome, and thank you to everyone who has supported this project. Every like, every new subscriber, motivates us to continue creating more historical documentaries. If you enjoy history without unnecessary detours, subscribe today. We release new videos every day. Tell us in the comments which historical figure you would like to see here. Our story today explores the life of Tang Taizong, born Li Shimin, one of the most influential emperors in Chinese history. His reign combined military power with cultural wisdom, creating a model of governance admired for centuries. Our story takes place in Wugong, a county in the province of Shaanxi, in the year 598 after Christ. It was here that Li Shimin, who would later be remembered as Emperor Tang Taizong, was born into a family of immense prestige but also into an empire collapsing under the weight of corruption, rebellion, and overextension. The dynasty in power, the Sui, had united China after centuries of division, yet its unity was fragile. Li Shimin's father, Li Yuan, came from the aristocratic Li clan of Longxi, a family of noble heritage that traced its lineage back to generals and administrators who had long served in imperial courts. Li Yuan himself was a respected commander in the Sui military and later the founding emperor of the Tang Dynasty. Shimin's mother, Dugu Qianluo, brought another layer of noble ancestry, tied to the influential Dugu family, known for its strong alliances with ruling houses. Together, these two families created a heritage of political strength and expectation that would shape the young boy's destiny. But what did it mean to be born in such a turbulent time? The Sui dynasty under Emperor Yang was collapsing. Though the dynasty had built the Grand Canal and sought to expand Chinese influence into Korea and Central Asia, its constant wars and crushing taxation had bred deep resentment. Widespread peasant uprisings, famine, and economic strain threatened the throne. Shimin's early years were marked not by peace, but by an empire on the brink of chaos. From an early age, Li Shimin was immersed in Confucian classics. Tutors introduced him to the Analects of Confucius and the historical writings of Sima Qian, whose records of the grand historian provided models of both noble rulers and tyrants. Could a young boy, raised in such a household, fail to absorb the sense of destiny that came with these stories? According to historian Twitchett and Fairbank in the Cambridge History of China, aristocratic sons of this era were trained not only in literary refinement but also in the arts of archery, horseback riding, and military command. Shimin excelled in both worlds. He became skilled in calligraphy and poetry, but he also practiced the bow and spear under the watchful eye of military retainers loyal to his father. His character was described by later chroniclers as disciplined, ambitious, and sharp-minded, showing signs of the commanding presence he would later embody as emperor. Yet around him rebellion spread. By the early years of the 7th century, entire provinces erupted in open defiance of the Sui regime. Roads that once carried caravans of trade now saw columns of armed men, some bandits, others self-proclaimed champions of justice. Could a young Li Shimin have understood then that his future would be forged in these flames of civil war? One story, preserved in Tang Annals, tells of Shimin's fascination with military maps and battle formations. Even as a child, he was said to study them long into the night, asking questions about how smaller forces might outmaneuver larger ones, how morale could be decisive in a battle, and how leaders earned the loyalty of their troops. While many aristocratic youths preferred courtly entertainment, Shimin's mind was already shaping itself around the challenges of command. His family's standing shielded him from the hunger and suffering of common peasants, but he was not blind to their plight. Reports of villages burned, fields abandoned, and entire families reduced to wandering refugees filled the atmosphere of his upbringing. These impressions would later influence his policies, when as emperor he sought to reduce taxes, reorganize land distribution, and ease the burdens that had crushed the people under the Sui. Wugong, his birthplace, sat near Chang'an, the ancient capital that had long served as a center of Chinese dynastic power. The proximity to the city meant that Shimin's world was always tied to the fate of empire. The streets of Chang'an, filled with merchants, monks, and foreign emissaries, represented the crossroads of Asia. As a boy, Shimin walked in a world both provincial and cosmopolitan, rooted in Shaanxi soil yet connected to the Silk Road. By the time he reached adolescence, the empire's decline had accelerated. The once mighty Sui armies were exhausted, their defeats in campaigns against Goguryeo in Korea draining the treasury and demoralizing soldiers. It was in this atmosphere that Li Yuan, his father, began to calculate his chances of rising as a new ruler. And in these calculations, his second son, Li Shimin, would play a decisive role. The question remains, how did this boy, born in the turbulence of a dying dynasty, grow into one of the most celebrated rulers in Chinese history? The silence of his childhood years leaves us only fragments, anecdotes of study, training, and observation. Yet the stage was set. The storm of rebellion was approaching, and Li Shimin would soon be thrust into the center of it. Would he merely survive, or would he transform the chaos into an opportunity to reshape China itself? That is the question that hangs as we leave his childhood behind and step into the collapsing world of the Sui. Our story now moves into the early youth of Li Shimin, the boy who would later ascend the throne as Emperor Tang Taizong. The year is the early 7th century after Christ, and the once mighty Sui dynasty is unraveling at shocking speed. As Shimin entered his teenage years, the empire around him descended into famine, uprisings, and military failures that shattered confidence in imperial authority. Could any young man of noble birth remain untouched by such immense upheaval? Li Shimin was raised within the aristocratic Li clan, one of the most prominent families in the region of Shaanxi. His father, Li Yuan, served as a respected military governor and held command over crucial troops in the northwest. This status provided the young Shimin not only with physical safety but also with an intimate window into the strategies and struggles of high politics. He listened as generals discussed the weakness of the Sui court, as officials whispered of overtaxation, and as refugees begged for protection. Such scenes, described in the Cambridge History of China by Twitchett and Lowy, reveal how the collapse of the Sui was not a sudden fall but a long erosion visible even to contemporaries. The Li household was disciplined. Shimin's mother, Dugu Kieluo, was remembered as a woman of strict virtue, instilling in her children the values of Confucian morality and respect for tradition. Yet, while she emphasized the classics, the streets outside their residence spoke a different language, that of rebellion. Repeated uprisings spread through the countryside, and local strongmen declared themselves kings or champions of the people. According to the Zizhi Tongjian, the great chronicle compiled centuries later by Sima Guang, the years of Shimin's adolescence were marked by an almost unbroken chain of revolts. What effect did this have on the young heir of the Li family? Surrounded by violence and political uncertainty, Shimin matured quickly. His training went beyond books and ritual. He rode horses daily, practiced archery until his arms ached, and learned the tactics of both cavalry and infantry. His father encouraged such preparation, for Li Yuan already foresaw that his family's survival might depend on military strength. Among his siblings, the relationships were complex. His elder brother, Li Jiancheng, was the designated heir in family tradition, while Li Yuanji, a younger brother, also harbored ambition. The rivalry between the three sons would eventually explode in tragic bloodshed. But even in youth, tension was present. Jiancheng, favored for succession, leaned toward courtly refinement and bureaucratic connections, while Shimin, bold and ambitious, gathered respect among soldiers and retainers. Could the empire contain both visions without tearing apart? One pivotal moment came when Shimin began to accompany his father on minor military inspections and campaigns. He was still young, yet witnesses noted his keen eye for terrain and his surprising ability to inspire loyalty among soldiers. In one early incident, recorded in Tang Annals, Shimin advised a different positioning of cavalry during a skirmish with bandits, an adjustment that brought quick victory. Whether embellished or not, such stories reveal how his reputation as a commander began to form before he had even reached adulthood. The collapse of the Sui accelerated with Emperor Yang's disastrous campaigns in Korea. Vast armies marched north, only to be devastated by harsh winters and well-prepared defenders. The financial cost was unbearable, draining the treasury and forcing new taxes that broke the patience of peasants and elites alike. Li Yuan, watching from his post in Taiyuan, calculated his options. His son Shimin, meanwhile, absorbed every lesson from these failures. Never exhaust the people with endless campaigns, never underestimate the morale of troops, and always match ambition with careful planning. By this time, Shimin's literary and philosophical studies were not neglected. He read the Book of Han and other dynastic histories, learning how empires rose and fell. He studied the Tao Te Ching, pondering the paradoxes of power, and Buddhist sutras, which taught impermanence and compassion. Later historians often highlighted this combination, a warrior who also quoted poetry and understood the classics. Was it not this very balance that would make him such a unique emperor? His family's position grew increasingly precarious. As the Sui court demanded new levies and conscription, resentment boiled in the provinces. Rumors spread that Li Yuan might one day rebel. Shimin, though still young, began to take on responsibilities beyond his years, advising his father, securing allies among local gentry, and keeping morale high among troops who were weary of serving a failing dynasty. The weight of his aristocratic heritage was heavy. Nobility in that time was both a blessing and a risk. To be noble meant to have wealth, estates, and retainers, but it also meant to be watched carefully by the central government, suspected of disloyalty, and exposed to rivalries. Shimin walked this narrow path with growing confidence. As the years passed, the boy became a young man, one whose name was whispered with admiration by soldiers and with caution by courtiers. His energy, discipline, and intelligence marked him as someone destined for more than secondary roles. Was he aware, even then, that the empire's future might rest on his shoulders? The Sui dynasty, unable to sustain itself, was collapsing like a fortress eaten from within. Provinces slipped out of control, and pretenders declared themselves emperors across the land. It was in this collapsing world that Li Shimin stepped forward, no longer a boy but not yet the emperor he would become. His youth ended not in peace but in the gathering storm of rebellion. And so the question lingers. As Li Shimin sharpened his sword and expanded his knowledge, did he already sense that he would not only fight for survival, but for the chance to seize the mandate of heaven itself? Our story now turns to the years when Li Shimin stepped out of youth and into the chaos of rebellion, proving himself not only as the son of Li Yuan but as a commander of extraordinary ability. The empire was fractured, the Sui dynasty gasping in its final breaths, and warlords, rebels, and opportunists rose across China. Could one young man carve order out of this immense disorder? By the year 617 after Christ, rebellion had reached nearly every province. Local leaders declared themselves kings, generals abandoned their posts, and peasant armies swelled with desperation. Li Yuan, stationed in Taiyuan, began to act. He raised troops, gathered supplies, and calculated his chance to challenge the crumbling Sui court. At his side was Li Shimin, barely 20 years old, who quickly emerged as one of his father's most trusted commanders. The old Book of Tang describes Shimin as tall, broad-shouldered, and commanding in presence, with the eyes of a hawk and the calm demeanor of a strategist. He was not reckless. He studied each battle carefully, balancing aggression with preparation. Soldiers began to notice something unusual. Unlike many aristocratic leaders, Shimin shared their hardships. He ate their food, rode in the rain, and listened to their concerns. Was this not the seed of loyalty that would carry him through countless campaigns? The first great test came when Li Yuan marched south to seize Chang'an, the ancient capital. The Sui court, weakened by years of failure, could barely mount a defense. Shimin led cavalry detachments that struck quickly at enemy positions, cutting supply lines and forcing defenders into confusion. The Ziji Tongjian records that in one encounter, he personally led a charge that broke enemy formations, rallying his troops to capture key fortifications. His ability to inspire was as important as his tactics. With Chang'an seized in 617, Li Yuan declared the founding of a new dynasty, though he still nominally claimed loyalty to the Sui. It was only a matter of time before he formally established the Tang. And behind every victory stood Shimin's hand, shaping the fate of armies. But the empire was far from secure. Rival powers rose everywhere. Dou Jianda in the northeast, Wang Shichong in the central plains, and various other leaders claiming the mandate of heaven. Li Yuan could not face them all alone. It was Shimin who led Tang forces into battle after battle, carving out victories that secured the dynasty's survival. Consider the campaign against Wang Shichong, who held Luoyang. The confrontation culminated in the famous Battle of Hulao in 623. Shimin commanded 30,000 men against a much larger force of 100,000 under Dou Jianda, who had allied with Wang. Outnumbered more than 3-1, how could the Tang forces hope to prevail? Shimin devised a strategy of patience and psychological pressure. He fortified his camp, refused rash engagements, and waited for enemy exhaustion. Then, in a decisive maneuver, he launched a surprise cavalry attack that shattered Dou Jianda's lines. Chroniclers later wrote that the dust of charging horses blotted out the sun, a scene both terrifying and unforgettable. Victory at Hulao not only crushed Dou Jianda but also forced Wang Shichong to surrender. With these two rivals eliminated, the Tang gained dominance over the Central Plains. Historians such as Dennis Twitchett in the Cambridge History of China argue that this victory was the true birth of Tang supremacy. And at the heart of it was the young general Li Shimin. What made his leadership so effective? Shimin understood that war was not only about numbers but about morale, timing, and perception. He used ambushes, feints, and rapid cavalry maneuvers to confuse enemies. He rewarded soldiers for bravery, punished corruption strictly, and sought discipline above all. His armies moved with cohesion rare in an age of chaos. Yet war also brought brutality. Chronicles describe villages burned, captives executed, and rival leaders paraded before surrender. Shimin, though admired as a cultured general, was also ruthless when needed. Was this cruelty, or simply the hard logic of survival in a time of civil war? The question lingers, as it does with many leaders who carved empires through blood. By his mid-20s, Shimin had already become a figure of near-mythic reputation. Soldiers spoke of his calm under pressure, his ability to read the battlefield like a scroll, and his refusal to waste lives carelessly. Rivals feared him, allies respected him, and even his father increasingly leaned on his judgment. The Tang dynasty, still fragile, was being held together by the victories of one young commander. But success also sowed the seeds of rivalry. His elder brother, Li Jianqing, watched as Shimin's fame grew. Jianqing was the designated heir, yet his younger brother's achievements in war outshone his political authority. Courtiers began to whisper, could the dynasty truly survive if the rightful heir was overshadowed by the general who commanded the loyalty of the army? The victories against rebels and rivals were real, but they also created a dangerous balance within the Tang family. The question was no longer whether Shimin could win battles, but whether he could survive the jealousy his success provoked. And so we ask, as Li Shimin stood triumphant at the gates of Luoyang, did he already sense that his greatest battle would not be against external foes, but against his own brothers within the Tang court? Our story continues in the year 618 after Christ. The Sui dynasty had collapsed under the weight of its own ambition, and the stage was prepared for a new dynasty to rise. Li Yuan, Shimin's father, formally declared the foundation of the Tang dynasty in Chang'an, the historic city that had served as capital for centuries. The dynasty took its name from Tang, the family's homeland in Shaanxi. But behind the declaration stood years of careful planning, military victories, and above all the skill of Li Shimin, who by now had become the most celebrated general of his generation. The early years of the Tang were precarious. A dynasty might be proclaimed, but its survival depended on recognition, loyalty, and power. The empire was still fractured, with rival warlords, peasant armies, and remnants of the Sui all contesting authority. Could the Tang dynasty secure legitimacy in such a fragmented landscape? That was the central question that haunted the new rulers. Li Yuan assumed the throne as Emperor Gaozu, establishing the structures of government. He appointed his sons to key positions. Li Jianqing, the eldest, was made crown prince. Li Shimin, already renowned for his victories, was given command of the main Tang armies. Li Yuanji, another younger son, was placed in charge of internal affairs. At first glance, the arrangement seemed balanced. But balance is fragile, and in the shadows, rivalry brewed. Shimin threw himself into consolidating the dynasty's power. His victories at Hulao and Luoyang had already given the Tang control of the Central Plains, but challenges remained across the empire. He led further campaigns to subdue rival generals, integrating their forces into the Tang military. Each success increased his reputation. Chroniclers in the Old Book of Tang describe him as a man who rode at the front of his troops, fearless, with banners streaming and cavalry thunderous behind him. His soldiers adored him, and yet, within the court, this admiration became a source of tension. Chang'an itself reflected the mixture of triumph and uncertainty. The city bustled with merchants, officials, and monks from across Asia, but it was also filled with rumor. Who truly held the power in the Tang court? Some whispered that Emperor Gaozu ruled in name, while Li Shimin's armies secured the dynasty in practice. Could an emperor survive if his throne depended entirely on the victories of his son? The rivalry between Li Shimin and his elder brother Jianqing deepened. Jianqing, as crown prince, represented tradition and legitimacy, but he lacked the military charisma of his younger brother. Courtiers loyal to Jianqing warned that Shimin's growing prestige threatened the balance of succession. They argued that no dynasty could tolerate a prince overshadowing the heir apparent. Others, sympathetic to Shimin, suggested that the dynasty's survival required his leadership. What happens when loyalty to family collides with loyalty to empire? This question haunted the Tang court. As Shimin's armies secured more victories, Jianqing maneuvered to weaken his position, attempting to control appointments and reduce his influence at court. Li Yuanji, ambitious and aligned with Jianqing, added his voice to this opposition. The seeds of civil war within the dynasty were quietly taking root. Meanwhile, Shimin continued to govern as much as he fought. He introduced reforms to improve tax collection, promoted meritocratic appointments, and advised his father on diplomatic relations. He insisted that the dynasty must not repeat the mistakes of the Sui, endless wars and heavy burdens on the people. His vision was pragmatic: win the support of the people through stability while expanding Tang influence carefully. Diplomacy also became part of his strategy. Envoys were sent to neighboring states, including Korea and Central Asian kingdoms, to secure recognition of Tang authority. These gestures mattered as much as military campaigns. For a dynasty to endure, it required both internal legitimacy and external acknowledgement. The scholar Howard Wexler, in Mirror to the Son of Heaven, notes that Li Shimin displayed a rare combination of military prowess and administrative insight. He was not content with battlefield victories alone. He understood that empire required systems, laws, and cultural authority. This ability distinguished him from many other warlords of his age. But every triumph carried risk. His popularity among generals and soldiers made Jianqing increasingly anxious. The brothers began to build rival factions within the court. Shimin's allies were commanders and frontier officials, while Jianqing drew support from civil bureaucrats and aristocrats wary of military dominance. The court, once a place of unified celebration for Tang victories, now buzzed with suspicion and intrigue. The complexity of succession politics in this period cannot be overstated. Chinese dynasties had always been vulnerable to disputes between brothers and sons. The principle of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherits, often clashed with the reality of talent and power. Was it just to place Jianqing on the throne simply because of his birth order, when Shimin had proven himself the savior of the dynasty? Or was that very reasoning the road to endless bloodshed, as ambitious brothers challenged rightful heirs? The tension grew so sharp that Emperor Gaozu struggled to control it. Some sources suggest he considered deposing Jianqing in favor of Shimin, but pressure from Jianqing's supporters prevented such a move. Gaozu, perhaps weary of conflict, hoped to maintain balance between his sons. Yet balance built on rivalry is like a sword resting on its edge. A single push can bring it crashing down. By the mid-620s, it was clear that the situation could not hold. Jianqing and Yuanji sought to eliminate Shimin politically, perhaps even physically. Shimin, aware of the danger, began to plan his own decisive move. The stage was set for one of the most shocking and decisive moments in Tang history, the confrontation at the Xuanwu Gate. So as the Tang dynasty gained strength across China, within its very heart a storm gathered. Could a dynasty truly survive when its own princes turned against one another? And would Shimin, the general who had conquered rivals on the battlefield, now be forced to confront his own brothers in a struggle for life, death, and the throne itself? Our story now reaches the summer of the year 626 after Christ. The Tang dynasty, only 8 years old, stood stronger than any rival in China. Yet inside the imperial palace in Chang'an, fear and suspicion replaced celebration. The dynasty was outwardly victorious, but within its walls, a silent and dangerous conflict consumed the family of the founding emperor. Would the empire be lost not to outside enemies, but to the rivalry of brothers? Li Jiancheng, the crown prince, was officially heir to the throne. By birthright, he was the next emperor. But Li Shimin, the younger son, had led the armies, defeated rivals like Dou Jianda and Wang Shichong, and won the loyalty of soldiers and commanders. Jianqing saw his brother's prestige as a direct threat. Together with Li Yuanji, the youngest brother, Jiancheng plotted to weaken Shimin's power. Shimin, in turn, feared that hesitation would mean his own elimination. The Ziji Tongjian, compiled centuries later by Sima Guang, tells us that rumors spread of Jianqing planning to ambush Shimin at a banquet. Soldiers whispered that assassins lurked in the corridors of the palace. Could Shimin afford to wait, knowing that his rivals sharpened knives in the dark? The silence of these days must have felt heavier than the clash of any battlefield. On the 4th day of the 7th month in the year 626, Shimin made his choice. He set an ambush at the northern gate of the imperial palace, the Xuanwu Gate. His loyal generals and guards concealed themselves in hidden positions, bows strung, swords sharpened, waiting for their targets. It was a moment of shocking decisiveness. Brother would turn against brother, and blood would determine the future of the dynasty. As Jianqing and Yuanji approached, Shimin struck. Arrows flew, horses panicked, and swords flashed in the morning light. The battle was quick, brutal, and irreversible. Jianqing was cut down. His ambitions ended in the dust outside the gate. Yuanji was killed soon after. Later chroniclers described how the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise of combat, the silence of a family torn apart. News of the ambush spread through the palace. Panic seized officials, but Shimin acted with speed. He rode into the inner court, presented himself before his father, Emperor Gaozu, and declared that he had eliminated a plot against the dynasty. Was this a defense of the throne, or a seizure of it by force? To contemporaries, the answer depended on loyalty. To historians, it was both. The shock was immense. Imagine the sight. Imperial guards dragging the lifeless bodies of princes through the palace gates, courtiers trembling. The emperor himself confronted with the reality that 2 of his sons lay dead by the hand of a third. Could any dynasty remain unchanged after such a scene? Yet Shimin knew that hesitation was fatal. He secured control of the army, reassured officials, and forced the court to accept his actions as necessary. Within weeks, Gaozu named him crown prince. 2 months later, perhaps weary or simply powerless, Gaozu abdicated the throne. Shimin ascended as Emperor Taizong of Tang. The Old Book of Tang records that Shimin justified his actions as the defense of the state, claiming that Jianqing and Yuanji endangered the dynasty through their jealousy. Some historians, such as Howard Wexler in Mirror to the Son of Heaven, note that Shimin's logic was brutally practical. Better that 2 brothers die than that the dynasty collapse into civil war. But could one ever wash away the stain of fratricide? The immediate effect was stability. With Shimin as emperor, the Tang dynasty now had a leader who combined military power with administrative vision. Generals respected him, scholars saw his dedication to Confucian order, and the people soon benefited from his reforms. Yet the memory of Xuanwu Gate lingered, a shadow cast across his reign. How could a man who killed his own brothers present himself as the moral ruler of a Confucian empire? Taizong attempted to answer this question through action. He portrayed himself as a ruler who listened to criticism, valued wise ministers, and sought to reduce the suffering of the people. He cultivated an image not of ruthless ambition, but of necessary decisiveness. And in time, many accepted this narrative. The dynasty flourished under his rule, and later historians often praised him as one of China's greatest emperors. But behind this praise remained the silence of that morning at Xuanwu Gate, when blood paved the way to power. The episode remains one of the most shocking moments in imperial Chinese history. It reminds us that dynasties, like families, are built on fragile bonds. In the Tang, as in many dynasties before and after, the struggle for succession was more dangerous than any foreign invasion. So we end this part of the story with a haunting question. Could Tang Taizong's reign, celebrated as one of the brightest in Chinese history, ever fully escape the shadow of the brothers he killed to claim it? The year is 626 after Christ. The young emperor, now Tang Taizong, has seized the throne in a storm of blood and ambition. The coup at Xuanwu Gate had silenced his brothers but left deep scars. Could a man who began his reign through fratricide build a stable empire? Or would the dynasty collapse under the weight of suspicion and fear? The first challenge was legitimacy. Tang Taizong understood that the Confucian world judged rulers not only by victories but also by virtue. How could he convince officials and the people that he was worthy of the mandate of heaven? His answer was to govern with wisdom, restraint, and pragmatism, presenting himself as a ruler who placed the needs of the people above personal power. One of his first steps was to strengthen the central administration. He restructured the government into three main departments: the Chancellery, the Secretariat, and the Department of State Affairs, each with specific functions and checks on one another. This system, described in the Cambridge History of China, became the backbone of Tang governance. Instead of concentrating authority blindly in the hands of favorites, Taizong encouraged open debate among ministers. He even declared, "Water can carry the boat, but water can also overturn it," a reminder that rulers depended on the people's support. Equally important was the selection of officials. The Sui dynasty had already experimented with examinations, but Taizong expanded them, making the civil service examinations a central path to office. Candidates were tested on Confucian classics, history, and governance. Was this not revolutionary? In a world dominated by aristocratic families, suddenly even men of modest background could rise through talent and scholarship. This policy not only improved administration but also gained Taizong the respect of scholars across the empire. Yet reforms were not only about bureaucracy. The land system was reorganized to address the suffering of peasants. The equal field system distributed land according to family size, ensuring that farmers had enough to live on but could not accumulate estates that threatened state authority. Taxes were reduced, and labor obligations were carefully regulated to avoid the crushing demands that had doomed the Sui. These measures lightened the burdens of ordinary people and stabilized the countryside. Could this balance between state power and peasant welfare explain why the Tang became one of the most enduring dynasties in Chinese history? The emperor also focused on the military. He reorganized troops into the fubbing system, where soldiers were part-time farmers and part-time warriors. They trained regularly but also cultivated their own fields, reducing the financial cost of maintaining a large standing army. This model, practical and efficient, gave Taizong a disciplined force ready for rapid mobilization. Having risen through war, he knew that an empire without loyal and organized soldiers could not last. But beyond institutions, Taizong sought to shape the moral tone of his reign. He surrounded himself with honest advisors, even those unafraid to criticize him. The most famous was Wei Zhang, a minister who bluntly confronted the emperor about his mistakes. When courtiers advised Taizong to silence him, the emperor replied, "Taking a mirror of bronze, one can see if one's clothing is correct. Taking history as a mirror, one can know the rise and fall of states. Taking a person as a mirror, one can see one's own gains and losses. Without Wei Zhang, I have lost a mirror." These words, recorded in the Old Book of Tang, reveal a ruler who valued correction as much as praise. Chang'an, the capital, became the center of these reforms. Streets filled with merchants, scholars, and monks. Foreign envoys arrived from Central Asia, bringing gifts and tribute. The city, rebuilt and expanded under Tang rule, reflected the stability that Taizong carefully cultivated. Its markets bustled, temples thrived, and the court projected the image of a dynasty both confident and open to the world. Still, suspicion lingered. Could a man who had killed his brothers ever escape doubts about his motives? Taizong worked tirelessly to replace fear with respect. He pardoned many of Jianqing's and Yuanji's former supporters, inviting them back into government service. He rewarded generals who had once opposed him, showing that loyalty to the state mattered more than loyalty to a faction. Such gestures of reconciliation helped heal the wounds of civil strife. Cultural life also blossomed. The emperor encouraged the preservation of historical records, ordering scholars to compile official histories of previous dynasties. He believed that rulers must study the past to avoid repeating mistakes. In this sense, he was both a conqueror and a historian, seeking to learn from those who had ruled before him. The first years of his reign were therefore a delicate balancing act, restoring confidence, healing divisions, and strengthening the foundation of the dynasty. Through reforms in land, taxes, military organization, and official appointments, Taizong transformed chaos into order. Yet shadows remained. The empire was stable for the moment, but powerful enemies lingered beyond its borders: nomadic confederations in the north, rival states in Korea, and restless tribes in the west. And inside the palace, questions of succession would one day return to trouble him. Could even the most capable emperor control all these forces indefinitely? As the first stage of his reign closed, the image of Taizong began to crystallize. A ruler of immense ability, determined to prove that the blood spilled at Xuanwu Gate had not been in vain. But the test of an emperor lies not in peace alone. War, diplomacy, and expansion now awaited him. So we must ask, would Taizong's wisdom and reforms be enough when the empire faced its greatest external threats? Or would the dynasty once again be thrown into the immense uncertainty of war? The year is 628 after Christ. Tang Taizong, still in the early years of his reign, turned his eyes beyond the capital. The empire had been stabilized within, but threats loomed across the frontiers. Could the dynasty survive without securing its borders? And more than survival, could it thrive without extending its influence into the lands beyond? Taizong understood that the strength of a dynasty was measured not only by domestic reforms but also by how it stood among neighbors. The greatest threat came from the powerful Eastern Turks, who controlled the vast steppes north of China. These nomadic confederations, mounted on swift horses and hardened by the open plains, had long raided Chinese frontiers. Many dynasties before the Tang had struggled against them. Would Taizong repeat the mistakes of the past, or carve out a new approach? In 630, the Tang army marched north. Taizong personally commanded the campaign, leading tens of thousands of soldiers across the harsh terrain of the steppes. The chronicles describe how he rode at the head of his cavalry, his banners whipping in the wind, a symbol of imperial resolve. The decisive moment came when the Tang forces surrounded and captured Ilig Kagan, the leader of the Eastern Turks. This stunning victory shattered their power. The once feared confederation was broken, and its people submitted to Tang authority. The victory was more than military. Taizong resettled many Turks within Tang territory, offering them land and security in exchange for loyalty. He even adopted the title Heavenly Khan, presenting himself not only as Emperor of China but also as the protector of steppe peoples. This bold move extended Tang prestige across Central Asia, transforming the dynasty from a regional power into a continental empire. But the steppe was only one direction. To the west lay the Silk Road, lifeline of trade connecting China with Persia, India, and distant Byzantium. Envoys from these lands now traveled to Chang'an, bringing silk, glass, spices, and horses. The Tang court became a hub of diplomacy. Foreign embassies filled the capital, their colorful costumes and exotic gifts a visible reminder that Taizong's rule reached far beyond his borders. Could any previous Chinese dynasty boast such wide recognition? To the east, Korea remained a challenge. The peninsula was divided into three kingdoms: Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla. Goguryeo in particular resisted Tang authority. Though Taizong launched campaigns against it in the 640s, the terrain, fortifications, and fierce defenders made conquest difficult. The old book of Tang notes that Taizong himself joined the expedition in 645, only to face bitter resistance at the fortress of Angshi. Despite initial successes, Tang forces could not capture the stronghold. This failure revealed the limits of imperial ambition. Could even a great emperor bend every frontier to his will? Yet failure in Korea did not overshadow success elsewhere. Tang power spread deep into Central Asia. By forging alliances with oasis kingdoms, Taizong secured trade routes and projected influence far westward. The empire's reach extended to the edges of the Persian world. Even Arab and Byzantine envoys reportedly arrived at Chang'an, acknowledging the Tang as equals in a world of empires. Diplomacy was as important as conquest. Taizong skillfully balanced marriage alliances, gifts, and recognition to secure loyalty from vassal states. Korea, Japan, Tibet, and various Central Asian states all sent envoys. The Tang court used the tributary system to formalize these relationships. Foreign rulers offered tribute, and in return the emperor granted them titles, gifts, and legitimacy. This system, described by scholars like Mark Edward Lewis in China's Cosmopolitan Empire, reinforced Tang authority without constant warfare. Within China, these achievements strengthened Taizong's reputation. The emperor who had seized power in blood now appeared as the ruler who united the Chinese heartland and extended its influence across Asia. The people saw foreign envoys marching through Chang'an, carrying tribute, and they believed the empire stood at the center of the world. Could any image be more powerful for a dynasty seeking legitimacy? But expansion brought new questions. Could such vast frontiers be sustained? Would the incorporation of nomadic peoples create unity or tension? Taizong believed in the principle of cultural integration. He encouraged Turks, Central Asians, and others to serve in the Tang administration. He promoted the spread of Chinese laws, rituals, and Confucian teachings while respecting local customs. Chang'an itself became a city of many languages and religions. Buddhist monks from India, Zoroastrians from Persia, Nestorian Christians from the West, all lived within its walls. Taizong's approach combined the sword and the scroll, conquest, and culture. He knew that power alone could not hold an empire. It required recognition, respect, and exchange. By making China a hub of diplomacy and trade, he ensured that the Tang dynasty was not only feared but also admired. Still, shadows lingered. The defeat at Angshi Fortress reminded all that even the greatest emperor faced limits. Could the Tang truly dominate Korea? Or would the peninsula remain a thorn in the empire's side? And what of the succession at home, where his sons already began to show rivalry? For now, the world recognized Tang Taizong as one of the most powerful rulers of his age, a man who combined battlefield victories with diplomatic genius. But history teaches us that expansion is never the end of a story. It is only the beginning of new challenges. So we ask, would Taizong's empire, stretched across mountains, deserts, and seas, endure the test of time? Or would the very size of his achievements contain the seeds of future conflict? The year is 635 after Christ. The empire has been secured through victories over the Turks and the submission of vassal states. The Tang dynasty now stood as the most powerful realm in East Asia. Yet Tang Taizong knew that military triumphs alone could not guarantee the survival of his dynasty. Could a throne built on conquest endure without wisdom, culture, and justice? From the very beginning of his reign, Taizong cultivated the image of a ruler who listened, studied, and learned. He believed that an emperor should act not only as a commander but also as a teacher and guardian of civilization. His palace became a place of debates, libraries, and artistic expression. Ministers, scholars, poets, and monks all found their place at court, each contributing to the vision of a cosmopolitan Tang empire. One of Taizong's most important achievements was his support for the civil service system. The examinations, which tested knowledge of Confucian classics, were expanded under his rule. Candidates came from across the empire, and some rose from humble families to high office through talent and study alone. This system, described in the Cambridge History of China, not only provided capable officials but also gave legitimacy to the dynasty. Did it not show that the Tang valued wisdom and learning above bloodline and privilege? Taizong also oversaw reforms in taxation and land distribution. The equal field system, first introduced by the Northern Wei and refined under the Sui, was maintained and strengthened. Land was assigned according to household size, ensuring fairness and preventing the unchecked growth of aristocratic estates. Taxes were carefully calibrated, designed not to burden peasants but to sustain the state. In his edicts, Taizong warned against the greed of local officials and emphasized the principle that the people are the foundation of the empire. Could any lesson be clearer after the collapse of the Sui? Religion flourished under his rule. Buddhism had grown in influence during the Sui, and under Taizong it became deeply embedded in Chinese society. Monks traveled freely, temples were built, and foreign pilgrims arrived to share scriptures. The most famous was Xuanzang, who later traveled to India and returned with hundreds of texts. Taizong personally supported his mission, demonstrating that the emperor saw Buddhism as both a spiritual and cultural bridge. Taoism, linked to the Tang family's own claimed ancestry, also enjoyed imperial favor. Rituals honoring Laozi were performed, and Taoist texts were promoted. Yet Taizong balanced this with Confucian governance, ensuring that religion never eclipsed the role of state. Nestorian Christianity even arrived during his reign, carried by missionaries from the West. In 635, Taizong received the Persian monk Alepen, granting him permission to translate Christian texts into Chinese and to establish a church in Chang'an. Could there be a clearer sign of the Tang Empire's openness to the wider world? Chang'an itself became the stage of this cultural brilliance. The city was vast, carefully planned with wide avenues, bustling markets, and cosmopolitan neighborhoods. Merchants from India, Persia, Central Asia, and even distant Byzantium traded in its stalls. Poetry was recited in elegant gatherings, music from foreign lands filled banquet halls, and calligraphers produced works that still inspire admiration. In this environment, Tang culture blossomed into what many historians call one of the golden ages of Chinese civilization. Art and literature thrived under imperial patronage. Taizong himself composed poems and practiced calligraphy. His works, though perhaps not equal to later masters, symbolized the belief that rulers should embody refinement. Court painters, sculptors, and artisans found steady support, producing works that blended Chinese traditions with foreign influences brought along the Silk Road. Administration under Taizong was equally remarkable for its pragmatism. He valued honesty and often encouraged ministers to speak freely. Wei Zheng, his bold advisor, became famous for criticizing the emperor to his face. Instead of punishing him, Taizong rewarded his honesty. "A mirror of bronze shows your clothing," he once said, "but a loyal minister shows your heart." Such openness created an atmosphere where mistakes could be corrected rather than hidden. How many rulers in history welcomed such blunt truth? Justice was another concern. Taizong reduced harsh punishments, seeking a balance between order and compassion. He pardoned many criminals, insisting that prevention was better than cruelty. According to the Old Book of Tang, executions declined sharply during his reign, and prisons were less crowded than in earlier dynasties. The emperor's goal was not fear but trust between ruler and people. The fusion of culture and governance gave the Tang dynasty stability unmatched by most earlier dynasties. Scholars, poets, generals, and monks alike saw Taizong as a patron and protector. His court became a model emulated by neighbors such as Korea and Japan, who sent embassies to study Tang laws, architecture, and rituals. The Japanese even restructured their state under the Taika reforms, inspired by Tang institutions. Could there be a greater sign of influence than reshaping foreign governments in the Tang image? Yet challenges remained. While culture blossomed, the strains of succession began to appear. His sons, raised in the shadow of a powerful father, quarreled and schemed. Intrigues within the palace hinted that the unity of the court was fragile. Still, the brilliance of Taizong's governance cast a long shadow. As the years passed, the emperor's image was no longer only that of a conqueror, but also of a cultured sage king. Military victories had secured the throne, but it was culture, administration, and openness that made his dynasty shine as a beacon across Asia. So we ask, could this harmony of power and culture endure beyond Taizong's lifetime? Or would the turbulence of family rivalries once again shake the dynasty's foundations? The year is 640 after Christ. The Tang Dynasty under Emperor Taizong stood at the height of its prestige. The empire stretched across vast lands, trade routes flourished, and Chang'an dazzled as the most cosmopolitan city in the world. Yet inside the walls of the imperial palace, far from the gaze of merchants and envoys, a different story unfolded, one of family rivalries, palace intrigues, and the hidden struggles of succession. Could the dynasty that projected such strength outward survive the divisions within? At the heart of Taizong's private world stood Empress Zhongsun. She was more than a consort. She was a partner in governance, admired for her wisdom, humility, and loyalty. Chroniclers in the Old Book of Tang describe her as a model of Confucian virtue, a woman who advised the emperor with sincerity and reminded him of compassion when decisions weighed heavily. Taizong often said that without her counsel, he might have taken harsher and more reckless paths. But her influence was not meant for the public eye. She shaped the emperor quietly, through conversations in the privacy of the palace. Could an empire be guided by a hand so discreet? Tragically, Empress Zhongsun's health declined, and she died in 636. The emperor mourned deeply. He ordered modest burial rites, honoring her wishes, and wrote poems in her memory. Her death left a void not only in his personal life but also in the balance of the court. Without her presence, palace rivalries grew sharper, unchecked by her calming influence. The question of succession soon became the most pressing issue. The designated heir was Li Changqian, Taizong's eldest son. At first, Changqian showed promise, educated in the Confucian classics, trained in the arts of governance. But as he grew older, disappointment replaced hope. Sources like the Zizhi Tongjian describe him as increasingly indulgent, distracted by pleasures, and resentful of the expectations placed upon him. He lacked the discipline and charisma of his father. Meanwhile, another son, Li Tai, emerged as a rival. Intelligent, cultured, and ambitious, Li Tai attracted scholars and officials to his side. He built a reputation as a patron of learning, sponsoring vast encyclopedias and scholarly projects. Some ministers whispered that he, not Changqian, should inherit the throne. Could the dynasty afford to place loyalty to birth order above talent? Or would a more capable but younger son better secure the empire's future? This rivalry poisoned the atmosphere of the court. Changqian, sensing his brother's rising influence, grew paranoid and resentful. Li Tai, confident in his abilities, maneuvered for favor. Taizong, caught between his sons, tried to maintain balance but found himself trapped in the same dilemma that had haunted his own father, the tension between rightful succession and proven ability. The conflict reached a climax when Changqian, in desperation, plotted rebellion. In 643, he was discovered conspiring with disgruntled officials and military officers to overthrow his father. The revelation shocked the court. How could the crown prince, entrusted with the empire's future, turn against his own father? Taizong acted swiftly. Changqian was deposed and exiled. But the crisis did not end there. The emperor now faced the challenge of choosing a new heir. Li Tai expected to be named, but Taizong, wary of his ambition, refused. Instead, he chose Li Ji, a younger and milder son, known for his humility and gentleness. Li Ji would later become Emperor Gaozong, though at this point many saw him as a compromise rather than a strong leader. Did Taizong believe that a gentler heir could prevent the cycle of fratricidal conflict? Or was he simply too weary to choose another ambitious warrior? Palace intrigues extended beyond his sons. Concubines, eunuchs, and factions of officials competed for influence. Gifts, marriages, and secret alliances shaped decisions as much as decrees and laws. Behind the grandeur of Chang'an's halls, Whispers of betrayal circulated constantly. Could even the most capable emperor control every whisper, every plot, every ambition within those walls? Despite these troubles, Taizong sought to maintain order. He reminded his court that unity was the foundation of the dynasty. In edicts, he lamented the destructive power of rivalry, warning that a family divided cannot stand, and an empire divided cannot endure. Yet he himself was a living contradiction, a ruler whose throne had been won through the death of his own brothers. Could his words erase that memory from the minds of his sons? The tension between image and reality defined the palace. Outwardly, Taizong was the wise and cultured ruler, the heavenly Khan, who commanded the loyalty of peoples across Asia. Inwardly, he was a father beset by rebellious sons, torn between love, disappointment, and the heavy demands of imperial stability. The court was a mirror of the empire itself, strong yet fragile, brilliant yet shadowed by fear. And as the years passed, the question became unavoidable. When Taizong's reign ended, would the Tang continue in harmony, or would the seeds of rivalry bloom once more into conflict? So we close this chapter with a haunting question. Could the emperor who mastered armies and diplomacy also master the ambitions of his own blood? Or would the silent battles of the palace prove more dangerous than the open fields of war? The year is 645 after Christ. Emperor Taizong had ruled for nearly 2 decades. His armies had triumphed on the steppes. His capital of Chang'an had grown into the largest and most cosmopolitan city on earth, and his reforms had given stability to a land once torn by chaos. Yet time, relentless and silent, now turned against him. Could even the most capable emperor escape the burdens of age, illness, and doubt? In his later years, Taizong began to suffer from recurring sickness. Records in the old Book of Tang describe bouts of fatigue, fever, and weakness that limited his ability to ride into campaigns as he once had. He had been a warrior emperor, but now he found himself increasingly confined to the palace. Still, his mind remained sharp, and he dictated policies and read reports daily. But how could a man who had built his rule through energy and vigor accept the slow decline of his body? Despite illness, Taizong remained determined to extend Tang authority. In 645, he personally led the famous campaign against Goguryeo in Korea. It was to be his last great military endeavor. The Tang army, vast and well-equipped, marched eastward, confident under the emperor's command. At first, the campaign brought victories. Tang forces captured several fortresses, advancing deep into Goguryeo territory. Yet the decisive target, the fortress of Ungshi, resisted. The defenders fought with unexpected resilience, and Tang forces struggled with supply lines stretched across harsh terrain. After months of siege, Taizong was forced to withdraw. The failure was a rare humiliation for a ruler who had won so many battles. Could it be that the mandate of heaven was reminding him of human limits? Back in Chang'an, the emperor reflected on the lessons of the campaign. He admitted his mistakes openly, declaring that arrogance had clouded his judgment. Historians such as Twitchett and Wexler note that this humility distinguished him from many rulers of the past. Where others blamed generals or soldiers, Taizong blamed himself. Did this not reveal a ruler who saw the throne not as personal glory but as a sacred duty to the people? Yet illness deepened. Ministers noticed his thinning figure, his slower steps, his long silences. Court physicians prescribed herbal remedies, tonics, and rest, but nothing reversed the steady decline. His thoughts turned increasingly to succession. After the disgrace of Li Chengqian and the ambition of Li Tai, he had named Li Ji as crown prince. Li Ji was gentle, obedient, and respectful. But could such a mild son rule an empire built on conquest and reform? Taizong wrestled with this doubt. In moments of candor, he confessed his fears to close advisors. He worried that his death would unleash new rivalries, undoing all he had built. He sought to prepare Li Ji by surrounding him with capable ministers and issuing detailed instructions on governance. "Take history as a mirror," he reminded his son, "and you will know the rise and fall of states." These words, recorded in the Zizhi Tongjian, became a guiding principle for generations. As his health failed, Taizong also reflected on his own past. He remembered the blood spilled at Xuanwu Gate, the ambition that had driven him to kill his brothers. Did he regret it? Chroniclers suggest that he carried the memory heavily. He justified it as necessary for the survival of the dynasty, yet he never dismissed its moral weight. Could the most glorious reign erase the shadow of its beginning? By the late 640s, the emperor's condition worsened. He spent more time in bed, dictating edicts from his chambers. Ministers came quietly, bowing low, as the once mighty general now struggled even to rise. Outside, Chang'an bustled with life, merchants filled the markets, and foreign envoys lined up at the palace gates. The empire appeared eternal, yet within its walls, the man who had built it was fading. In the year 649 after Christ, Taizong died in the capital. He was buried in the grand mausoleum of Zhao, accompanied by statues of war horses and tributes from across the empire. Officials wept, soldiers mourned, and the people remembered him as both a warrior and a sage king. His son Li Ji ascended the throne as Emperor Gaozong, inheriting a dynasty powerful yet burdened with expectations. The story of Tang Taizong closes with a paradox. He was the emperor who united military power with cultural wisdom, who listened to ministers yet ruled decisively, who expanded the empire yet acknowledged his mistakes. He was both conqueror and statesman, ruthless in ambition yet thoughtful in governance. Could any ruler embody such contradictions and still be remembered as one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history? And so we end with a question for you who watch. Was Tang Taizong's greatness born from his wisdom, or from the immense weight of the blood that placed him on the throne? If you are not yet subscribed, support us by subscribing and joining this project. Thank you for watching. Our next video will tell the extraordinary story of Wu Zetian, the only woman to rule as emperor in the long history of China's dynasties. Born in the Tang era, she rose from concubine to empress, defying expectations and rewriting the role of women in imperial politics. Subscribe so you don't miss it when it is released. And here are 2 more videos we believe you will enjoy. We'll see you there.